Is Jim Cornette right about All Elite Wrestling? Tony Khan, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and Cody Rhodes? We'll talk about it all next on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. Hello and welcome to the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications as we're trying to hit 10,000 YouTube subscribers before All Elite Wrestling's All Out. So last Thursday, Jim Cornette released his podcast and he talks about All Elite Wrestling. And he had some interesting things to say about All Elite Wrestling. To paraphrase what he said, basically he was saying how excited he was about All Elite Wrestling when he was having a conversation with Tony Khan. But then he found out who Tony Khan would be working with, and that would be the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and Cody Rhodes. And the quote was, his heart sank. Obviously, we know that Jim Cornette does not like the Young Bucks. He does not like Kenny Omega. And I think, paraphrasing what he said, he thinks that AEW will fall to its demise because of the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. So, Ralph, does Mr. Cornette have a point here with All Elite Wrestling?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, I think that there are certainly things that he's pointing out that maybe AEW and Tony Khan should be slightly concerned with. But then there's obviously the other side of the spectrum where you can point to what he's saying and just kind of say that he might be a little out of touch. The one thing that you can confidently say is that the wrestling industry as a whole has always changed, and it's had its high points and it's had its low points. And who knows? AEW could be on the cusp of creating a new wrestling boom with an entirely new audience, and that's what they think they're kind of tapping into. And Jim Cornette obviously disagrees with that. And I guess that's kind of what we're here to talk about now. If we feel he is correct, if he makes any valid points, or if we feel that he's just kind of blowing all of this out of proportion.
Now, I did listen to this segment all the way through, and one thing that clearly is pointed out here, we all know he does not like the Young Bucks. He does not like Kenny Omega. Uh, basically, because he feels that they do not take things seriously when it comes to professional wrestling. And he kind of was vindicated on that point with Fighter Fest, where they come out as, characters from Street Fighter and they're doing Hadouken spots on the Lucha Brothers and the Laredo Kid. And
Hmm.
they're not really bringing ring psychology into their matches. It's more about a spot fest. At least that's from the Young Bucks perspective. Um, and of course, for those that don't know, Jim Cornette never liked Kenny Omega since he found out that he once wrestled a 9-year-old girl. So,
And a blow up doll.
and a blow up doll. So because of those two things, he's not a fan of Kenny Omega. So
Yeah.
because of that background, it's like they haven't, I guess, matured yet because we still see them, making jokes and even making jokes at WWE once in a while, and the whole thing with the librarian and the long-term booking and, making fun of the Baron Corbin push, um, stuff like that. So in that case, Cornette has a point, but I think because of his, as some people would say, blind prejudice towards them, he doesn't realize that, at Fight for the Fallen, we saw that the Bucks can have a real wrestling match and be serious when they can be or need to be. They're not just all fun and games all the time. And I think that's where Cornette thinks that AEW will fall to their demise and fail because of the Young Bucks.
Well, it's more or less the demeanor and the way they kind of approach their pay-per-views or just wrestling in general. He feels like there's a lot of tongue in cheek and a lot of like winking at the crowd, and they just reveal too much and it kind of exposes the business.
Yep.
The other thing he also says, and I touched on this a little bit when we reviewed I believe it was Fight for the Fallen.
Fight for the
No, no,
Fallen was the
no.
last one. So the one before is Fighter Fest.
Fighter Fest. So when we were reviewing Fighter Fest, when you were saying how they came out in the Street Fighter gear, one of the things that Jim Cornette does touch on is he says they're trying to cater to just a video game audience. Now, I can't tell if you can't really say if he's going to be vindicated on this until we know if AEW is going to be around for the long term or if it ends up being a fad. he is under the impression that they are catering to a group that is just going to allow them short-term success and not really planning for the future. So I remember when I saw them come out in that gear, and obviously I know it's a gaming thing and all of that stuff, and Kenny Omega coming out in his gear obviously was a shout out to Street Fighter, and like I said, they were at the gaming fest, so it all made sense. But in my opinion, I kind of understand where he's coming from in that respect, where he's saying that they're just catering to the fans that they already have. You have to think of this as a business, right? Yes, it's fun and everybody wants to go out there and kind of please the fans, but at the same time you also have to understand the position AEW's in. It is still very much a startup business that is not guaranteed success. They have to prove that they're here to stay. And the only way that they're going to stick around is going to be able to appeal to the masses, because the only way a business is successful in the United States is it's judged by the amount of money it brings in. You have to gain money to make sure that you can attract other talent, pull in other talent from other companies, whether that's the WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Ring of Honor, whatever. If AEW wants to remain competitive, that should be their primary goal. You know, expansion, making sure the revenue's there, making sure they're able to not only sustain talent but go out there and get the best talent in the world. And I understand where Cornette's coming from in that respect, because if they're just going to cater to this crowd that they already have, whether it's the hardcore fans like you and I who are going to watch AEW regardless, or they're going to cater to this to the group of fans that, you know, maybe they're in on the video games and all that stuff and they understand the character, that's not going to appeal to the masses, and I don't know if that's going to assure them long-term success. I could be totally wrong, Jim Cornette could be totally wrong, but that should be their primary goal right now as a startup company, is trying to appeal to the masses, especially when you have Tony Khan who's saying that they are going to try to get the lapsed fan, the fans that have stopped watching wrestling altogether, because 10 million people used to watch, and now there's roughly like 2 point some odd million watching Monday Night Raw. Where did those other fans go? Well, I can pretty much guarantee you that if most of those fans tuned in and saw that, you know, maybe a certain percentage of them that would resonate with, but I imagine a lot of them wouldn't be really too enticed to watch AEW because they saw some guys dressed up in Street Fighter clothing. Now, again, I know that sounds critical, especially to the AEW fan, but think of it as a business owner, from as Tony Khan. If you're Tony Khan, you have to think long-term investment. What's going to ensure success for the company in the long term? Maybe their base and the amount of people that you'll get crossover from the video game world and professional wrestling. Maybe it's there. I don't know if it is or it isn't. It remains to be seen. But I definitely understand where he's coming from in that respect.
No, I agree too. I think the quote that Cornette actually had was, "You pan to the camera or pan to the crowd, and it's a lot of men, a lot of bald men, a lot of beards." So basically, you, Ralph, a lot of yous out there in the crowd. No, like 18 to 34, maybe even 45. And I've said this before that, you know, there's a reason why WWE is very successful from a business perspective. For years and years and years, they've always catered to kids. And Cornette has even said this. Once you're a wrestling fan, you stay a wrestling fan unless they turn on you. So yes, I understand there's a lot of frustrated WWE fans out there. And because of that, they stopped watching wrestling, because most of those WWE fans, the alternative was WCW or ECW,
Yeah.
and those are gone. And really, there's no one that has come close to an alternative to watch since. And yes, I know I'm going to get in the comments. What about TNA? What about New Japan? What about Ring of Honor? What about MLW? So on and so forth. But no, none of them are close to what WWE is doing. And the other thing is that WWE, they cater to kids because they know if they get the kids, they got the parents too. They got the parents to buy the merchandise for the kids for their birthdays, for Christmas, for, you know, kindergarten graduations and middle school graduations, whatever the case may be. They have them. You know,
Hmm.
it's, you know, you sell to a kid, you sold 4 tickets. You sell to
Right.
an 18 to 45-year-old, you sold 1. That's why WWE can
Now,
fill MetLife Stadium and All Elite Wrestling barely filled Daly's place.
Yeah, and again, they're also a startup, and we have to keep that in mind. And
Yes.
the other thing is, I'm not trying to say I'm siding with Jim Cornette because again, I could be totally off on this. There could certainly be the amount of crossover that will ensure them long term success. I don't foresee that, but maybe I'm totally wrong on that. All I'm saying is, I would suggest to them try to think long term and not so much with what. Don't just pander to the fans that you have now. Think of what's going to ensure long term success because that's what's going to be best for the business. That's what's going to be best for the industry. A place where people can go back and forth if they choose to, or a place, generating enough revenue where you can go out there and get the best talent in the world. The one thing I will say is this about the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. I do think that the elite in general, I do think he's selling them short because, to see the amount of success they've been able to generate without really, you know, push from like a major promotion. Yes, obviously they were working for Ring of Honor sparingly and New Japan Pro Wrestling. But just the amount of attention they've been able to draw to that elite brand, whether it was T-shirt sales or the amount of people that were interested in All In or Double or Nothing, whatever it may be, they're obviously doing something right. Whether that's through YouTube with being the elite, any of that stuff, they're doing something right. So you
Hmm.
have to give credit where credit's due.
Right. One thing I will say, and I think Cornette is selling them short too, is I will say he did mention that Cody is the one that's gonna really be the deciding factor of how All Elite Wrestling goes, given his history, given his family, given his background in being in WWE and trying to transfer that over to AEW. It
Right.
makes a whole lot of sense. But I think with Tony Khan having these four executive vice presidents, they're all doing different things. And I think so far they've done a good job at using their expertise correctly. So
Yeah.
Cody is there to be the expert, the wrestling expert, the guy that's going to get the historians, the wrestling historians like Cornette. Eventually, maybe he'll get onto AEW's good side. Um, the lapsed wrestling fan, the frustrated WWE fan. That's what Cody's for.
So the one thing I will touch on is this, and you kind of started talking about this a little bit with your last point about Cody Rhodes. The one thing he does say a lot about the Young Bucks is he's very critical of the style of wrestling that not only they work, but Kenny Omega works, and a good majority of wrestling today, saying they don't sell enough, it's very fast paced, et cetera, et cetera. And I've heard countless other um, professional wrestlers be critical of the style that's wrestled today. But like I said, wrestling has always changed. If you compare a wrestling match like a match that Hulk Hogan and maybe the Ultimate Warrior were having, that's going to be different than a match that Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock had. And nowadays, maybe it's a little more faster paced, but that's not just in professional wrestling. You look at sports in general, everything is speeding up, everything is faster. The game of baseball, they're finding any way possible to make it faster. And that's in large part due to the attention span. You look at WWE, one of the things people complain about is long drawn out storylines. People wanted Kofi Kingston to win the title the night after he had a good outing on SmackDown. People don't want to wait. People don't have the attention span to wait
That's a
anymore.
great point.
And I'm not saying that he's wrong because I'm more of I'm a fan of traditional wrestling. I think that Cody's approach to matches is more the style that I prefer. But like we always talk about, wrestling is subjective.
Hmm.
But the style of wrestling is always going to change, and you also have to keep in mind Jim Cornette is somebody that's looking at it from the inside. He's an insider. He's been involved with professional
Right.
wrestling. He's not going to look at it from the perspective of a fan. So he's looking at every minute detail on a show under a microscope.
Right.
The same way a professional wrestler would look at it because they know, like, oh, he should have done this in that spot. And you're never going to hear me, and you'll probably never hear you comment on the actual in-ring work because we don't have the expertise to comment on that because we're not professional wrestlers.
Right.
We offer our perspective from a fan standpoint, and as long as the fans are happy, and as long as the fans are filling the stadium and buying tickets and watching it on TV and buying a Young Bucks t-shirt, a Kenny Omega t-shirt, that's what matters. Just
Hmm.
because Jim Cornette doesn't agree with the style that's being worked or somebody says it's wrong, they're out to prove that their style and that whatever they're trying to present is the new style. And
Right.
Not everybody's going to agree on that, but you're always going to have that resistance to change, no
And,
matter what it is,
right.
not just in
And
professional
that's
wrestling.
a great point because when Cornette was really a big influential part of the wrestling industry, it was kind of towards the tail end of the territories. And then he did Smoky Mountain Wrestling and then eventually was part of creative for WWE. So that's where his real experience and expertise comes from. But today's wrestling is obviously different. Now, he does have praise for some guys in AEW. He loves MJF. He loves
Yep,
Cody.
he should.
And rightfully so. He likes those guys. He likes Luchasaurus and he even likes Excalibur. He just doesn't like them in a mask.
Yep.
But back to my point here about the executive vice president's whole thing here. They all have expertise, and I think at the end of the day, they're going to be used that way to help AEW flourish. Cody is going to help with the lapsed fan. They're going to help with the frustrated WWE fan and guys like Cornette that were wrestling historians and, have magazines and newspaper clippings and God knows what, a whole ceiling of memorabilia that we know
Right.
Cornette has. The Young Bucks are they're there for merchandising. They're there for building a tag team division, something that WWE has failed miserably for
Right.
years. Kenny Omega is there to bring in the Japanese talent. Right now, it's the women. He's bringing in Riho, Hiraku Shida. Even Aja Kong has come back. So you got that. And Brandy Rhodes is trying to be, I guess, the Stephanie McMahon of AEW to an extent. So I think, they're all put in the right place to succeed. And guys like Cornette just need time to see it come to fruition. And I will admit, the buy-ins to these shows do not give them a good argument for someone like a Cornette.
No, I'm so I think comedy and wrestling and these gimmick type of characters can work in small amounts. Obviously, you look at the Hurricane. I guess you can use him as an example. He wasn't really necessarily somebody who was meant to be taken seriously, but he was certainly over, and he played his part really well. To Jerry when he was like the butler of William Regal, that
Santino
was like
Marella.
comedy. Yeah, things like that. So yeah, I'm not saying that there's not room for that type of stuff. I think what I'm trying to say is, if you're the top guys, like you're the Young Bucks and you're Kenny Omega, I just don't think you should be coming out there and pandering to the fans that you already have dressed as Street Fighter guys. I would have liked this if that was going to be done. I feel like it should have been somebody who isn't necessarily as important as those guys are to that company because they're the face of the company. Yes, I get it. You're going to appeal to the fans you already have, but at this point, at this juncture, you have to understand you're a startup company and you should be trying whatever you can possibly do to appeal to the masses. So um I understand where Cornette's coming from. I think some of his critiques are a little dated because even by his own admission, I think like he'll make comments about, I don't understand why this happened in the show, and literally, if he had watched it, if he had followed being the elite, he'd know. Okay, well, this is why that happened.
Yep.
He'll say things like, "I don't know who Blink 182 is," even though they're actually a really popular band, not just now, but they've been popular for 20
Years.
some odd years. So maybe he is slightly out of touch and maybe he's disgruntled because the Young Bucks are having some success and Kenny Omega's having success and he's not a fan of those guys. But like I said, the wrestling industry is always changing, and maybe this is going to be the next change and the next revolutionary thing, but we can't really tell now after 3 shows. It's going to take some time.
Right. No,
If AEW is around for 20 some odd years competing against WWE and offering an alternative to what WWE is, and it forces WWE to be better, then we can really truly look at, what they did right or what they did wrong.
No, I totally agree. So only time will tell whether or not Jim Cornette is right and that AEW will fail because of the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, or they will actually have success because of the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. So very interesting conversation. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to share this all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast. Subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. We're trying to hit 10,000 YouTube subscribers before All Elite Wrestling's All Out. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti, and thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.